We're bringing you boots on the ground insight from the ranchers, conservationists, and partners who are helping to preserve the best of the Golden State for generations to come. Join the California Rangeland Trust for inspiring stories of resilience, innovation, and hope as we get tuned into the land.
I'm excited to welcome you to a special bonus episode of Tuned Into the Land here on World Soil Day. I'm Michael Delbar, CEO of the California Rangeland Trust and your host. A few weeks ago, we introduced you to Scott and Karen Stone of Yellow Landing Cattle Company. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that podcast yet, I highly recommend you do so. It offers a look into the family's deep-rooted commitment to the land and the steps they're taken to ensure its long-term vitality. While recording that episode, we realized that there was much more to uncover, particularly surrounding the innovative practices they're using to nurture and sustain their ranch. So we decided to split the conversation into two parts. Part one introduced you to the operation. And now in part two, we're diving into a topic that's essential to every rancher, soil health. Soil is the foundation of our rangelands, the bedrock upon which everything else depends. It's where our food begins and where life in our ecosystem is sustained. Without healthy, nutrient-rich soil, we risk losing the productivity and diversity that our lands provide. That's why today, on World Soil Day, it's the perfect moment to highlight the importance of soil stewardship and celebrate the efforts of those working tirelessly to protect and enhance it. In this episode, we dig deeper, quite literally, into how the Stones have put soil health at the forefront of their management practices. We explore a variety of innovative programs they're involved in, all aimed at improving soil quality and building resilience. From rotational grazing and cover cropping to composting and carbon sequestration projects, the Stones have seen firsthand the benefits of prioritizing the health of their soil. Their efforts have not only improved the productivity of their land, but also strengthened the ecological balance that supports wildlife and plant diversity. So with that, I'm excited to share the second half of my conversation with Scott and Karen Stone as they walk us through the importance of soil care and the practices that are making a difference on their ranch. You've put a lot of energy into improving the soil health on the ranch. Now, World Soil Day and Healthy Soils Week is here, and we want to learn more about the practices you've implemented on the ranch. So to kick things off, let's talk about the term healthy soils. If you ask 10 people what that means, you'll get 12 different answers. But what does it mean to you?
Well, healthy living soils are regenerative soils that are going to support the cattle industry, support the wildlife, support the biodiversity that we have on our different ranches. Our path into healthy soils is kind of been an interesting one. We, through cowboy logic, is kind of how we got into the original composting. And there's two things that happen on the ranch that, and most ranchers will say, yeah, you're 100%. I remember seeing that. And when you have a cow that defecates in a pile on the hillside like they all do, you go back next spring where that cow patty was, and your grass where that cow patty was is going to be 4 to 6 inches higher, darker green than the rest of the grass around it. The other thing we noticed is when we would clean out our hay barns in the fall, getting ready to put more hay in, and you'd have some old bales that were rotten or moldy or whatever, we'd pile them up and they would kind of self-compost. And then it would take out those piles of, what's left of the hay bales, and we'd spread them in the fields. Anywhere we'd spread them in the fields, we would see a change in the composition of the grass. It'd be darker in color. It would be taller. It'd be more dense. So we thought, wow, this is kind of sounding pretty interesting. I went to hear John Wick, who was the godfather of the Marin Carbon Project, speak down at a conference in Albuquerque, and was extremely impressed by what he had been doing with their own money and what they had achieved with the Marin Carbon Project. So that started us down the path. We did sign up for the Healthy Soils program several years ago when it first came out, and we did a 50-acre demonstration grant applying some compost on some of our rangeland. It was a 3-year program. It didn't exactly go the way we planned. We had 2 wildfires in that 3 years, and we had 3 years of drought. So the odds didn't stack up against us, or they did stack up against us for not having a successful Healthy Soils project. We have started working with a company called Agrman, and it's funny how things work out. A friend of mine, Doug Shaw, that lives down in Ventura, he'd been trying to introduce me to one of his real estate clients for 2 or 3 years, a gentleman named Bill Camarillo. And I said, well, I'll have to call him one of these days. When I get down there, we'll figure something out. It's always, we'll do it. We could get to it. And so our paths never crossed. And so when we did our Healthy Soils project, we did a demonstration day out at the ranch, and there was a young lady that came out named Kimberly Cook. And Kimberly worked for a company named Agrman. And Agrman has, I believe right now they make about 1 million tons of compost a year in the state. They have contracts with about 250 municipalities to handle urban green waste. They take that urban green waste that gets collected in the cities, the urban yard waste, and they take it and dump it. They clean out the trash out of the waste, the green waste. They grind it to a mulch, and then they take that mulch, and in 30 days, they can make #1 organic compost. So pretty interesting what they can do with that stuff. Kimberly comes out and comes to the seminar. Then she contacts me about a week later, says, would you have any interest in applying compost or maybe working with Agrman to see what can be done with some of this compost on rangelands? And I said, I would be very interested. Well, turns out who owns Agrman was Bill Camarillo. So we were able to close that circle. Took a few years to get it done, but started working with those folks. Very impressed by their operation. And so I purchased a 20-acre ag industrial property, or Karen and I did, with our 2 sons, located on Interstate 80, just by Dixon. And we partnered with Agrman and applied to Solano County for chipping, grinding, and blending permit for the facility, and also an ag composting permit. And ag composting, it doesn't take as much regulations as it does a big commercial composting facility. And so we thought we were going to, on a piece of property that was zoned for ag, we thought we'd have a great operation between the chipping, grinding, and blending, and also the composting. Unfortunately, we fought Solano County for 2.5 years. Finally, we had to drop out the ag composting part of the application because the water quality folks and the air quality folks were just couldn't wait to jump all over the application and apply all these different fees and costs to the project that were unnecessary. So it's interesting what's going to be happening in the state, because in 2013, the legislature passed AB 1383, which states that by January 1st of 2025, 75% of all the green waste that's going to landfills in the state of California has to be diverted out of the landfills. So they need about 115 new compost facilities in the state to handle what's going to be coming out of the landfills.
But you can't get a permit.
Well, again, we are in California, and so the legislator said, hey, this is great. We're going to pass this law. We're going to clean this stuff up. But nobody ever went to the other side and said, gosh, maybe we should sit down with the regulatory agencies in California and see if we can figure out a path forward to make this work for all parties. That has never been done. And in California, the regulatory agencies, when you go in for an application on anything like this, the answer is no, 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 and no. So very disappointing for something that's mandated as a state law. But then when in reality, as you go and try and get something done that's going to create jobs, make a lot of compost, divert a lot of green waste out of the landfills, and it's just one roadblock after another after another. So I have no idea how the state's going to solve that issue. We're trying to solve it working with Agrman on some of the stuff that we work on. The chipping, grinding, and blending facility was approved last year. started operating last December. That part is going good. I am currently trying to find a place in Yolo County where I can purchase and start an ag composting facility, because Yolo County actually is a agriculturally friendly county. So,
are you starting to see improvements from the application of this compost? Is it too early?
It's too early because we have not gotten into a set program. Again, the 50 acres that we did treat for the 3-year program, that wasn't done as, sorry to say, but when you get the government involved, you take a good idea and kind of mess it up a little bit. So one of the things that made the Marin Carbon Project work so well is they took a large amount of compost, they applied it at one time, and then they monitored the soil and the environment to see what would happen over a period of years. On the Healthy Soils program that we did, we were supposed to go with 15 tons of compost to the acre. In a one-time application, they made us split that up into 3 5-ton annual applications, which intensifies, it triples the cost of applying your compost. But in all fairness, we had 3 years of drought and 2 major fires. So none of that's helped, but we have had some good results in places that we've used it. We are in the process of composting some mulch now to put on some of our irrigated pastures down in the bypass next year. So we're looking forward to that. And we're looking forward to putting more compost on some of the rangelands.
The fires and you had 2 of them.
Correct.
Back to back.
2 years apart.
2 years apart. One of those fires, the first one hit pretty much almost the whole ranch, didn't it? The second one 2 years later wasn't quite as bad, but still hit pretty hard. How have you been able to recover from that experience?
Well,
we got another job.
Yeah.
3 jobs.
Robbed a few banks. Fire in California historically, up till about 50, 60 years ago, was a very normal occurrence. And all these ecosystems derived through the ages with fire as part of the ecosystem. Once Smokey Bear came around and Cal Fire came around, all that went away. So the last fire we had on our ranch was in 1988. It was 30 years prior. And it just burned some of the backcountry where the shamish brush and all that. So it didn't really affect the whole ranch. About 15 years ago, we partnered with Audubon, California, Yolo County Resource Conservation District. We put together a vegetative management plan, which was a 3-year program to go in and burn in the fall in the rangelands and also in the spring to try to get rid of invasive weeds, clean up some of the brush, reduce some of the fuel load. 3-year program. The first year, Cal Fire and BLM didn't sign the contract till the end of the very first year. So they came back and said, well, now it's a 2-year program. We're not going to add that first year that we wasted getting this signed back onto the program. And then, so we had 26 landowners and a total of 41,000 acres that had all signed up for this vegetative management program, ready to get things done. Let's get some burning going. Then you start moving forward into the burns, and you would get a Cal Fire captain that wanted to go and light everything on fire, which was awesome. Or you would get a Cal Fire captain that was afraid to light a campfire. And so when you add those together, along with the air quality folks on the no burn days and that kind of stuff, it was very challenging. I think we burned, in the 2 years that we were allowed to burn, I think we burned probably 1,500 acres a year. For 2 years. So out of the 41,000 acres, it was a dismal failure. In 2018, we had the fire come down the Cape Valley. They called it the county fire, burned 90,000 acres. Very fast moving fire. We had a tremendous fuel load on the ranch, and it came through the whole ranch and burned 7,000 of the 7,500 acres on our ranch. Very hot fire, very fast burning fire. 2 years later, there's a fire that starts over at Lake Berryessa, and it's starting to come through the hills. CAL FIRE comes to the ranch and says, we don't have the resources to fight this fire. We're going to open up the burn lines that we put in 2 years ago. We're going to backfire the ranch and we're going to leave. And that's exactly what they did. So CAL FIRE burned 7,000 acres of our ranch, which personally I don't think would have ever burned with that fire. This second fire was much different. It probably behaved the way the old fires used to, where it was just crawling along the ground. You could literally walk over the fire line. It would go around the oak trees. Still, there was a lot of dead and dying trees and brush from the fire 2 years ago. So consequently, we have today on the ranch just all kinds of dead and down trees. We almost need another fire because fire is a good tool for cleaning that up. The problem is we've had 2 really good wet years of rainfall, and we have the best dry feed I think I've ever seen on the ranch. So when we had the second fire in 2020, we ended up having to spend about $100,000 on hay that we had to go buy to replace the feed. And so on one hand, I would love to have another fire to clean up the ranch. On the other hand, I don't want to go buy a bunch of feed again. So hope that answers that question.
So when we talk about healthy soils, like we mentioned, it means something different to just about everybody you ask. You've talked about how important that is. What are some of the practices that you're incorporating to create and maintain those healthy soils? And how important is the livestock to that?
Well, I think the livestock are a very important tool that we utilize, and it's kind of how they graze on the land can make a big difference on the quality of the soil and your forage. And so when I came back from the Ranching for Profit school, we had traditionally had been fall calving herd, and Dad liked to split the herds up and have 40 or 50 cows in pretty much every field on the ranch. And we fed a lot of hay back in the day, and we would have to feed hay to every bunch of cattle, which is good for looking at the cattle. But from a cost standpoint, hay and firewood are exactly the same. You have to touch them 7 times to utilize them. And every time you touch them, it costs money. So we eventually switched our herd, took quite a while to get it done, over to a spring calving herd. So we now calve in sync with nature. And our hay feeding is very, very minimal. We feed some of our calves when we wean them, but not much more than that. We try to sell most of the hay that we produce. And so we took those small groups of cattle and we put them into larger groups. So we would take 3 herds of 50 and we'd put them into 1 herd of 150, and we would start rotationally grazing them through the ranch. And we've seen good results with the feed. Our ranch is set up now that we graze each field 2 times in the course of a year. And actually your grazing season is going to be about 6 to 7 months, depending on what kind of year you have. But during that time period, we'll graze each one of those fields once or a maximum of 2 times in that 6 or 7 month period. And so the cattle get used to being moved. They get used to when you show up at the gate and open it up and start whistling and get out of the way, they start moving. They know they're going to better feed. It's a little more challenging in the rangelands than it is on the irrigated pastures, because our fields can be anywhere from 30 acres to 500 acres and gathering those cattle. But once they get moving, they kind of know the program and they're pretty smart and they figure it out pretty fast. So I would say rotationally grazing our fields is a very important component. We have also started doing, we're in the 3rd year of doing no-till cover crop planting on some of the flats, and that works out really good. And those fields, we keep the cattle off of after we've planted till we get a really good growth in the spring. And then we will bring those cattle in and load that field up, and we'll put a bunch of cattle in there for 2 weeks and just pound it back down. The cattle do great because of the mix of clovers and grasses and different things that are in that cover crop mix. So that's worked out really well. In order to be able to rotationally graze, of course, you have to have the fences that can handle it, and you have to have your water systems. set up in each field so that every time you're ready to move the cattle, they've got a place to go with good water. That's pretty critical.
So why are these healthy soils so important? Why is this a priority for you? You've put a lot of effort into doing this. Why?
Soil is important no matter if you're growing a lawn, a garden, or growing a 7,500 acre ranch. And for us, if we don't have healthy soil, we don't have cattle production, because cattle graze for 90% of their life, and they're out there grazing on that grass. And so it's critical, absolutely critical, that we have healthy soil so that grass will grow no matter what's happening with our environment, no matter what Mother Nature is bringing to us. And by putting the compost on the soil, the water retention is, Scott could probably speak to the water retention, the increase in water retention in the soil. The microbes, we probably aren't going to get into all of that, but it's, like I said, you just can't have cattle production without healthy soils.
Healthy soils is the basic building block of the whole operation. And so the more things we can do to increase the quality of those soils, the better off we're going to be in the long run. We're pretty excited because we've been working with Agriman, and they've started a new company called Cool Path, and they are currently working on a program to put in some test pilot ranches. There's 4 of them in the state of California for a carbon sink program on each of these different ranches. And so we're going to be able to take these, and we have some high quality soils on several of the ranches, but now we can take and apply compost on an annual basis to these different fields and actually make them better. They're going to have better biodiversity. They're going to have better water infiltration. They're going to produce quite a bit more feed after the compost has been applied. And we're going to use the cattle as a tool to harvest that additional feed. These grasslands will sequester quite a bit more carbon once they've had the compost applied to them. And so they're looking at ways right now of being able to verify those voluntary carbon credits that are going to be produced by applying these compost on these rangelands and utilizing the livestock to harvest the forage that's produced on these rangelands. And one of the things that is so good about the verification of these carbon credits is that these companies that we're going to be working with, they're looking for permanence in these programs. And so the science is there that shows the compost application works, that there's a tremendous amount of carbon sequestration and benefits to the environment. And the nice thing about having a piece of property that has a conservation easement on it is that we can sign up for long-term contracts with these folks, and they have the assurance that that property is going to stay in agricultural production and grazing production for a very long time, in perpetuity. And so when they're looking to put these programs in place, that's of great importance to them. And it's of great importance to the people that are going to be buying these voluntary carbon credits.
What's about the future? And everything you've done, whether it's the family or the soils, the diversification, it's all about the future. And your families have done a wonderful job of thinking about that and preparing for it. And hopefully that healthy soils and the healthy operation, and it's there for you. And you're to be commended for the passion and the foresight and everything that you've done to make Yellow Land and Cattle the success it is today.
Well, I think about the Rangeland Trust and 25 years of their work and what they've conserved. And I think to myself, they didn't do this. Who would? So we have over 300,000 acres,
almost
400,000 acres conserved over 25 years. Who would have done it? And my goodness, what it's done for us and our family for the last 19 years that we've had the easement. It's allowed us to continue to be a cattle ranching family, and for that ranch to not go to some sort of development. And so that's how it should be. People today want to know where their food comes from, and we can provide that story in an honest way. They can come out to our ranch and see that this is exactly where your food comes from. And it is people like us who are producing this food. And I think sometimes that's the hardest thing for people to understand, is that, you know, they see that the cattle out on the hills, but they never go any further than that. You don't, because a lot of times you don't see the cowboys riding across the fields and things, but you see the cattle grazing, and they don't really think much further. It's just, you know, wow, those are cattle grazing out on that beautiful landscape, and how much they enjoy taking a drive out to the country to see that beautiful landscape. So the Rangeland Trust, again, has given our family the opportunity to conserve that ranch for not just us, but our community, our environment, our wildlife, the water that we manage, and hopefully, you know, that our legacy will continue.
Karen, you have such an eloquent way of saying that, and we are so proud to have your family as our landowner partner.
Thank you, Michael.
We hope you enjoyed this special bonus episode of Tune Into the Land. It was truly a pleasure to sit down with Scott and Karen Stone and dive into their experiences and insights. We're grateful to be able to share their knowledge and commitment to sustainable ranching with all of you. This closes the gate on another episode. We will be back with our regularly scheduled episode later this month, so be sure to hit that follow button so you can be notified when the next episode is released. Thanks for listening.